Hi everyone, the last topic in R programming is for loop. So what's the difference between for loop and repeat and while loop? The for loop is used when an operation needs to be repeated for a fixed number of times, for example, 100 times. So remember that the repeat and while loops are used when an operation needs to be repeated until a certain condition is met. Last time that we discussed, we repeat the loop until a certain condition. So 2 to the nth power is larger than capital N. So the condition is met. So the number of iteration is unknown in advance. So we have to run code to see how many times that it should repeat. So here's one simplest example of for loop. So basically this code that makes this vector x. So 1 square, 2 square, 3 square, 4 square, 5 square. So 1, 4, 9, 16, 25. So at first we define x as numeric vector of 5 zeros. So 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Then we fill in that x vector by this statement. So ith element of x is I square. Then we repeat this from I is equal to 1 to 5. So we can use the for parentheses I in 1 colon 5. 1 colon 5 is a sequence. So vector 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you want to put 1, 3, 5, you can just type the C parentheses 1, 3, 5. Then you can do it for I is equal to 1, 3, 5. Sometimes this brace is omitted, but it's better to put it for visibility. And of course, you don't have to use I. You can use J or any other, the ABC or any variable. So you can replace this. Sometimes you want to use the two for loops. The one is using I, the other using J. Okay, so a little more complicated example. So suppose that we want to create a vector of x2 minus x1, x3 minus x2, xn minus x sub n minus 1 when this vector is given. So unlike the example of while and repeat loops, we know the length of loop, the number of iteration in the loop in advance. If v is given, suppose v is a sequence of 100 numbers, then we have to do this basically 99 times. So in such a case, the for loop is easier. In while or repeat loop, we have to check the condition every time. But here, if length is n, just you can repeat n minus 1 times. So it's faster. We don't have to check the condition each time. So here is an example to code the previous pages. Algorithm. So given vector v, that we define this vector dv. So finally, we want to get this output. So x is given, that we want to see the difference between the two consecutive observations. So 3 minus 1, 6 minus 3, 10 minus 4, 50 minus 10. So the increment is the 2, 3, 4, 5. So this returns, dv function returns 2, 3, 4, 5. So how to define this dv function? So the input is v. So at first, we calculate the length of v. So length function is a kind of trivial function, but it's useful in our coding. And we declare vector w. So vector w is a vector with one less element than v. So numeric n minus 1. So this is the n minus 1 times zeros. So 0, 0, 0, 0, n minus 1 times 0. Then for loop. So we are defining function, but within the function, we use the for loop. For I is equal to 1 to n minus 1, you should put this parenthesis here, and parenthesis n minus 1 parenthesis. And the wi is the v of I plus 1 minus the v of I. So I plus first element minus ith element. Then finally, the w has been made, then we output W. So this function dv makes the difference series of x, so increment. But this function practically is not optimal way to code difference series in R, because the loop functions are slower than matrix algebra in R. So if you make for loop, repeat, or while loop, it's slow. Especially if you use multiple loops, then you feel the code is really slow. So it should be avoided if possible. And if we use the vector form or matrix form and avoid using for loop and while loop, then code is much faster. So this is different from more raw languages such as the C++. And better code is here. So dv2, this is basically the same function as dv, but much faster. Okay, so this is a function of v. At first, we calculate the length of v, then we take the difference between second to nth element of v minus the first to n minus first element of v. So this is component-wise the subtraction. So v2 minus v1, v3 minus v2, v4 minus v3, and so on, up to vn minus vn minus 1. Then this w is the output. So the output is the same, but this is much faster.